I'm Nina Moini. Thanks so much for tuning in to Minnesota Now. Tonight, the state health department is holding a hearing about the closure of a primary health clinic along the North Shore. The Aspirus Health Lakeview Silver Bay Clinic is set to close at the end of this year. That leaves the residents of Silver Bay to get their primary care at least 30 miles away. The clinic closure is part of a growing trend of shrinking access to health care in rural Minnesota. Joining me now are two people looking at rural health care access and finding solutions. David Beard is a professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth, working with the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission on rural health transportation. Thanks for being with us, Professor.
Thank you.
We're also happy to have Beverly Sidlo-Tolliver, who's the principal planner and mobility manager at the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission. Thanks for being here as well, Beverly.
Yes, thanks for having me.
David, I'd love to start with you. For people who are unfamiliar with the North Shore, could you tell us a little bit more about Silver Bay and who's going to be impacted by this clinic closure?
Silver Bay is an absolutely unique town in the North Shore of Minnesota. It's only 70 years old, formed 70 years ago to support the mining company taconite processing plant, which is located right up against the water. Mm-hmm. Silver Bay is itself pushed back from the water. All the rest of the North Shore towns are right up to the edge, but the taconite processing plant got the lakefront property, and the town is up the hill. It's about 1,800 people, about 30% of whom are over 65.
That is interesting. That's quite a population of a third of the population over 65 and older. So I understand that Silver Bay also recently lost its main social services center. Could you tell us about this center and what that loss might mean on top of a clinic closure?
Yeah, so the county is removing its permanent office in town. They're leasing a small space in one of the local nonprofits where they'll offer a fraction of the services, but instead of having drop-in availability, it will be by appointment. Or there will be a drop box. You can put a letter in the drop box, and the drop box will be monitored for correspondence, which is just such an incredible decrease in the availability of mental health resources, food shelf resources. Lots of different resources will decline because that the county is pulling away.
And Beverly, could you give us a sense for healthcare access more broadly in the Arrowhead region? How close the nearest hospital would be for people along the North Shore?
Sure. Generally on the North Shore, as you get further north, of course, that's going to exacerbate the distances folks have to travel upwards to 2 hours one way to access, whether it's their primary care or maybe more getting into the Duluth area. Because as these clinics continue to close through the Arrowhead and up the North Shore, transportation is usually not maybe considered in that factor and as a whole for transportation access. So hopefully we can bring that topic to light.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. Is this about who's going to be able to give folks a ride over to where they're going, or what if they don't have transportation? Tell us a little bit more about how that factors in.
Sure. And of course, transportation is multifaceted. Most people think of it from the point of view of their own, being able to get to point A to B throughout their own vehicle. But there's quite a bit of folks that have to rely on either friends or neighbors, family, or non-emergency medical transportation, which is a benefit that folks with Medicaid and other insurances can access. And those providers, those non-emergency medical transportation providers, are already not paid when there's not that rider in the vehicle. It's called unloaded miles. And so as clinic spaces become further from town centers, those providers are also having to travel farther without being reimbursed for their time and distance it takes for them to get to pick up that passenger. They're paid to bring that passenger, bring them back home, but then, of course, that extra distance as they're traveling back to their home base is considered unloaded and not necessarily reimbursed through the state.
Yeah, this is important to talk about because we often do think about the physical clinic being gone, a loss to access that way, but then how do you get to where you need to go? David, what do you say to folks who might say, well, it is a smaller, town of around 2,000 people or so. Is it inevitable that they wouldn't have the same resources that larger towns would? Or why do you think there's this focus shifting away from rural healthcare?
I mean, a portion of it is the declining funding at the federal and state levels for rural healthcare, for healthcare broadly. That's certainly part of it. I don't want to say it's inevitable, though. And the reason I don't want to say it's inevitable is that it becomes way too easy for us to console ourselves and say, well, a town of 1,800 couldn't possibly support those kinds of services. But what's the cutoff point? A town of 5,000? A town of 10,000? At what point will the austerity measures, which are slowly eroding rural healthcare, begin to erode the healthcare that we see in the larger cities on the Iron Range, perhaps even in a city the size of Duluth?
Yeah, Beverly, what would you add to that?
That it is a topic that needs to be always brought to light, that rural Minnesota matters and that there's value in those communities and the people that reside there and the life they've wanted to have for themselves by either moving to that area or staying in that area or moving back to the area. That rural Minnesota, like as David said, really does matter. Whereas there's, the cutoff is of a small town. What does that mean? What is small town? And so this goes beyond just say an inconvenience, which I think could be looked at as this rural infrastructure continues to maybe close one by one. It could be maybe put off as just an inconvenience, but it really is more to that than to the folks that live there and rely on those resources.
Yeah. And Beverly, what kinds of solutions are you looking at in your work to expand access? If the clinic is gone, then you have to get creative, right? What are some of the solutions you are looking at?
At this point, when the work we're doing with the University of Minnesota and they're powering small Minnesota communities is information gathering to this point to really get a gauge on the problem, how severe it is, and then that trickle effect out when a person either can't easily access these resources or cannot at all, and how that affects then their employer, the community, the state, the healthcare system itself, and provide that information to those leaders that can make real change at a policy level. I could list, my wish list out, but mostly at a high level it is for folks to listen to these issues and take them seriously. And then as far as like from a creative standpoint, I'm from a point of view that there's a system that could work if it were to work well, and maybe focus there. But reality is there might have to be a need to get innovative and look beyond the traditional, a person seeing a doctor face to face and what other type of access points that could be created.
And David, what should people do if they're listening? Maybe they live in the area and they think, well, I'm passionate about rural healthcare or I want to help. Could people sign up to provide transportation, or how can people get involved?
So the non-emergency medical transportation system is an absolute web of overlapping, a patch quilt of overlapping solutions, right? We've got volunteer drivers working with local nonprofits. Check the local nonprofit in your area, that especially for people over the age of 60. There's a complicated web of nonprofits trying to fill the gap. There's advocacy. Write a letter to your newspaper. Write a letter to your state representative expressing the needs that you see and the changes that you want. There are lots of cool ways to take action here.
All right. I really appreciate you both, David and Beverly. Thanks for your work and your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
David Beard is a professor with the University of Minnesota Duluth, and Beverly Sidlo-Tolliver is with the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission.